I'm Eric Nelson, and so happy that you could join us tonight. We welcome you, and we're happy that you could be here for tonight's program. And just a little bit about our church community. The Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Southwest Michigan is an inclusive, compassionate community working towards personal and social transformation, healing, and justice. We create inspiring programs like this one tonight as part of that work, and because we can do more together than we can do alone. So I want to introduce Donald tonight. Donald, I've known for, I don't know, probably met him 15, 17 years ago. And through his books, his one book, Engaged Spirituality, I was very taken by his teachings and also listening to his teachings on Dharma Seed. He has hundreds of talks, amazing talks that can provide deeper insight. If you're so moved tonight, I can probably provide some information on that if you want to continue to learn more from Donald. Donald's a renowned meditation teacher, he's taught in many places. Spirit Rock, I'm aware of, has been a professor at Saybrook and other universities, and has a strong social justice background as well. And I'll stop there. And Donald, I'll let you say a bit more about yourself and start the program.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, and good to be with everyone. And you know, if it works for you to have your video on, it's nice as I talk to be able to see you. If that can work for you, I would love that, just to be able to see people. And so thank you, appreciate that. And I'll say a little bit by way of background. I was born in the Washington, D.C. area, actually born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in Maryland, near D.C., and spent probably the first period of my life more in the eastern part of the country. Went to school in New England and spent time there, and then I received a PhD in philosophy and took positions in Ohio and Kentucky. So I was not so far away. I would go to Michigan very often to see my friend in Ann Arbor. So I taught at Bowling Green for 1 year, and I taught at then University of Kentucky, and also Kenyon College, and eventually moved out to California. But I should say that when I was in Lexington, Kentucky, I connected a lot with the Unitarian Church. I know some of you are with the Unitarian Church, so I would connect and talk periodically through the Unitarian Church. And, you know, my parents moved from the DC area to Richmond, Virginia, and they became connected also with the Unitarian Church there, and I would occasionally go there. And so some connection over the years with the Unitarian Church. And then probably in my mid-late 30s, I moved out to California, and it's where I live now. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area in Berkeley, California. Sort of my first sort of intensive learning was probably more as an activist, starting as a teenager, you know, being very involved with different groups. And this was the time of the Vietnam War. And, you know, and my college experience, very much engaged. I worked one summer in the US Congress, which was a challenging experience. And it's got a lot worse now, as we know. And also spent time over the years in France and Germany, studying some of their approaches to social justice, social action. But I also started to get, you know, probably from the beginning, started to notice what I thought were some of the shortcomings of some of the activist groups. For one, we didn't always treat each other well. And I could notice what we might call the shadow side of activism. And, to sum it up, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be part of the revolution, kind of echoing Emma Goldman, who said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution, something to that effect. And so it kind of opened me up. And, in college as well, I was getting interested in psychology and philosophy and deeper metaphysical or spiritual teachings, and eventually got drawn to Buddhist meditation, which I started in my kind of early mid-20s. Met Joseph Goldstein. Some of you know Joseph as a teacher of Buddhist practice, met him, and more or less have been practicing since 1976 with Buddhist practice in the insight meditation tradition, and also for about the last 15 years, also in the Tibetan tradition, particularly the approaches called Dzogchen and Mahamudra. Have also been involved with integrating meditation and inner work with social service and social change. Over the years, have been involved with a number of training programs to work with people who wanted to bring the two together, social service and social change. I've directed a number of training programs and been part of training programs with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship over about a 5-year period. We had a 2-year program with Spirit Rock. And I also, when I was teaching at a graduate school, designed along with others, and taught for 9 years, an interfaith program called Socially Engaged Spirituality, in which we had a study component and practice component as well. But this is a program where we looked at the resources for socially engaged spirituality, primarily from Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and indigenous traditions. And so that kind of interfaith perspective is part of my approach and background as well. And just in terms of what's happening in the present moment, I have been involved with attending to what's going on in Israel, Palestine. I've taught, had extended times teaching in Israel, particularly before the pandemic, and have also made a number of trips to the West Bank and met different Palestinian friends there, and I'm staying connected with what's going on right now, which is very painful and insane, if I can put it briefly. And so that's a brief introduction. And I currently teach groups and teach retreats. I teach regularly nearby every year, and I teach in North Carolina and Kentucky every year. Actually, North Carolina, I come down and teach at a retreat center called Southern Dharma twice a year, so not so far away. And I'll be teaching a retreat next June also in Indiana on the theme of transforming the judgmental mind, which is another area I work with. So I teach on that, and teaching in that area was not simply a choice I made for a cool topic, but rather it came out of my own experience. So just to be clear. Okay, so when Eric and I were talking, we thought to do a talk that would be in some way related to the monthly themes of the group. Is the group called Tree of Life? Yeah. And so the theme that we came up with was looking at the connection between opening to what is difficult or even painful, and having the capacities to do that, the link between that and opening to, we might say, wisdom and love. And I would say that you don't have the second without the first. And so what I want to do in maybe 25 minutes or so, somewhere around that amount of time, is to give a brief overview of that topic. Then Eric and I will talk together. He'll ask some further questions, and sort of the second third, and then the last third will have something like 25 minutes, 30 minutes to talk together, something like that. So that's the model. So when I was first getting interested in meditation, I heard the teachings that some of you know. I know a number of you practice meditation. Probably some of you have studied Buddhist teachings. I heard the teachings that some of you have probably heard, for example, in the Four Noble Truths, that there's suffering, there's a cause of suffering, it's possible to reach the end of suffering, and there's a path to the end of suffering. How many have some familiarity with that, right? So I heard those teachings, and I pretty much thought they were for other people. My interest was in bliss and in transcendent experiences, maybe reproducing some of my psychedelic experiences that I had had as a young person. And so I was not interested in suffering, and I didn't really hear them. And so I practiced, and actually did, in some of my early years of practice, particularly at retreats, longer retreats of 10, 14 days, experienced a fair amount of bliss and calm and deepening experiences and wonderful experiences, and didn't really have particularly challenging experiences. However, I stayed with the practice, and particularly through retreats, I started having some retreats in which I experienced difficult emotions, difficult mind states, sometimes quite difficult. I had one retreat probably 3 years into my practice where I experienced fear a good part of the retreat. And I actually studied the fear, which is what we're encouraged to do, study what's present. I couldn't get rid of it. And so I brought mindfulness to the fear. It was there a lot, probably most of the time, for probably 7 or 8 days. And at that retreat also, I had some very unsettling, painful experiences. And so, and later, there were some similar retreats where I opened up. I had one retreat where I had a lot of anger and worked with it. And this started to change my understanding. I had other retreats where I could start to see that I had a strong energy to control moment-to-moment experience. I didn't want to really experience the present moment without controlling it, which I think is pretty deep conditioning for many of us. And all of this led me to start listening maybe a little more carefully to the teachings which people had been saying, but I was saying those are not for me. So what are the teachings that we get that point to the importance of attending to what is difficult or painful? There are a lot of them. And I should also just say that more recently, just actually about 7 years ago, after having a lot of openness over the years to what's difficult, I had an experience. My mother died unexpectedly 6 days before I was scheduled for 30 days of retreat. And I had a grief retreat. And maybe we can come back to that, because I know grief is one of the themes. And by that point, I was very open to the painful experiences. And so I just, had more or less two guidelines: open to the grief when it's there and see what gets in the way. And it was in the workable range. So what are some of the teachings, and then what are some of the practices that are helpful for opening up to what's painful? And then how does that connect with a deepening of our wisdom and a deepening of our compassion? We could say that this is in the teachings of the Buddha. We could say that the teachings emphasize a little bit more the importance of being able to be with the painful. And there are two teachings in particular which are crucial and give us a sense of the understanding and are very practical. One of them is called the teaching of the two arrows. And so it's not typically a prominent teaching. It's in a text which in the English translation is about 3 or 4 pages long. But it's a very fundamental teaching, also a very fundamental teaching for understanding society, understanding violence. It goes like this. Everyone at times has painful experiences, part of being human. The Buddha talked about this as like being shot by an arrow. He called this the first arrow. And he said that, he asked the question, everyone is shot by a first arrow at times. How does a practitioner differ from a non-practitioner? The people he was talking to didn't answer his question. And so he answered it. And he said that a non-practitioner will tend, being shot by the first arrow, having a painful experience, when there is unconsciousness and when there are habitual tendencies, will tend to shoot a second arrow as if this would help get rid of the first arrow. What does that look like? It looks like at the level of the body, when I have, pain in my body, I will actually tend to tense around the pain in my body, actually causing more pain. And interestingly, the first application of mindfulness in the medical setting, probably as some of you know, came from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who brought in teaching mindfulness to people with some forms of chronic pain. Because what the study showed was that for people with some forms of chronic pain, many forms of chronic pain, about 80% of what they experience as pain is the shooting of the second arrow. It's the reaction. It's the tensing on a chronic level. And that if people could actually open more to the pain, they could reduce a good portion of that 80%. There'd still be the 20%, but they could reduce the shooting of the second arrow. Another way the second arrow could be shot is emotionally. I have a difficult experience, maybe in an interaction with my friend or partner or whatever, and I start blaming the other person, being judgmental, blaming the other person, myself, all examples of shooting the second arrow. Largely because we can't be with the first arrow. We think we can get rid of it by blaming someone. It's unconscious, habitual. We can see how someone says something I don't like to someone, I come right back with the second arrow, right? Someone says something I think is nasty or judgmental to me, I instantly come back with something nasty or judgmental. Is that familiar? Anyone relate to that? This is shooting the second arrow, right? And we can see, it's basically, I have received pain and I will inflict pain as if that would get rid of my pain. Need I talk about Israel-Palestine? We have received pain, we will inflict pain on you, right? Because we don't know another way to do it. And, of course, there are a lot more complexities, but that dynamic is part of many, many conflicts, whether interpersonal or social or even intrapsychic within ourselves. And so that teaching is very fundamental. There's another teaching that's very similar. And what it does is it points to the importance of us being able to be with what's painful. If we don't do that, we will tend to shoot the second arrow. And there's I'll give very briefly another teaching. Here's where you use the slide, Miriam. And so this is a teaching that came from the night of the Buddha's awakening. It's called the teaching of dependent origination. Probably some of you know this. It's a more complex teaching. This is the middle of the teaching, but the most relevant for our purposes. Basically says with every moment of experience, we have contact with something in the world, with an object through one of our senses. I see something, I hear something, I smell something, I taste something, I feel something in my body. And in Buddhist tradition, this could mean I think something. So far, fairly good. With every moment of contact, there's what's called a feeling tone, either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Most of our experiences are neutral. Maybe 98 or 99% of our experiences are neutral. We are very interested in the pleasant and unpleasant ones. And so, so far, so good. But what it says is when I'm not mindful and when I have underlying habitual tendencies with every pleasant experience, and the pleasant experience could be a pleasant body state, it could be a pleasant thought, it could be a pleasant emotion, it could be a pleasant interaction. With every pleasant experience, I tend to want it or want more of it, and I tend to grasp after it. With every unpleasant experience, I tend to not want it and tend to push it away. And so, for example, I have a pleasant experience of having a chocolate cake, a piece of chocolate cake for dessert. Very pleasant. I have a little bit of chocolate cake. Instantly, I grab for a second piece, right? That'd be an example. Or we could, I have an idea I really like, and I grasp after it. Grasping means there's a quality of it being compulsive, habitual, compulsive. Same thing with something unpleasant. And this is probably what we recognize more clearly. I have an unpleasant, and again, interaction with someone. And often we go from the unpleasant to the pushing away. I call that reactivity. Often we go to that in virtually automatically. I have an unpleasant experience with someone, I instantly say something negative, or I have a negative judgmental thought, etc. And so I can do this in a variety of ways. I can do this, again, at the level of thought. And again, often it's very, very automatic. Now, we can let go of the slide now. Now, what this calls for, what the teaching suggests is actually that when we're not mindful and not aware, we're more or less ruled by we like something, we don't like something, and that we actually go about our lives a little bit in a trance, going after the pleasant and pushing away the unpleasant, right? Now, an important complexity here is that this is not to say that going after the pleasant is a problem in itself, or that trying to not have the unpleasant is a problem in itself. This is a very significant complexity, right? And so it doesn't mean I should never have that second piece of chocolate cake. The problem isn't the pleasant. The problem is the unconsciousness, the habitual tendencies, the automatic quality. I once had a group in which we were looking at these teachings, and I said, you know, pleasure is not at all the problem. We could sit here and just have chocolate the whole night, and it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. And they said, let's try it. And we did it the next week, right? And we explored that, you know, we explored that. And maybe more obviously, you know, going towards, you know, wanting the unpleasant not to be there can be something that can be very important for our action. Think of an activist, in a sense, finds the unpleasant in injustice, right? The injustice is painful. It's unpleasant in certain ways. They might not use that language, but it fits into the teaching this way. And so the question is, do we try to stop injustice through our reactivity? We find this with a lot of activists. It kind of, this can take the shape of demonizing the opponent, having reactivity in the way we respond to injustice, which I would say causes further problems. Demonizing the opponents, not being able to be empathic or listening to the people with different views, being self-righteous, dogmatic. Anyone met a social justice activist who has those qualities? Or been one oneself? Right. And so it's the reactivity which is the problem. It's not the trying to end the unpleasant or go towards the pleasant. If we were taking, you know, a weekend with this teaching, we would go more into that. But I just wanted to name that because it's a really important thing. So how do we practice? Or another way to say this, some of you may know the Christian teacher, Richard Rohr. Anyone know Richard Rohr? Richard Rohr said, that you may know this, he said, pain that is not transformed is transmitted. That's another way to say it. When we don't transform our painful experiences, we engage in reactivity towards ourselves or towards others. And this, as it were, passes on the pain. We transmit the pain. And so in our meditation practice, we study this. And so this is a reason why it actually is important in our practice that we develop the capacity to open up to what's painful. You know, when it's there, when it's in the range where it's workable. You know, guidance I give is give a designation on a scale of 1 to 10 of the level of what's painful. If it's in the workable range, maybe not a 9 or a 10, bring mindfulness to it. Be with physical pain at times when it's workable, if it's predominant. Be with emotional pain, anger, fear, grief, sadness, when it's in the workable range. When it's not in the workable range, we tend to go out of balance with what's painful. And when it's in the 9 or 10, then the key is to do what helps us come back to balance. That's especially important when the pain is linked with trauma. You know, there's a lot of complexities there that we could go into. So we learn how to be with what's painful. We learn how to open and be with mild or moderate physical pain when it comes up in our meditation. My shoulder hurts a little bit. We learn how to be with it. We see our conditioning around what's painful. Same thing with what's pleasant. We hang out with what's pleasant. You could, we bring mindfulness to our meals, for example, a major place of pleasure. And we notice those tendencies. We can do that interpersonally. I can watch how I tend, when something happens interpersonally that's a little bit painful, I go into reactivity, and we can learn not to do that. Very key aspect of all this. We can watch the instances when we shoot the second arrow and try not to do that, right? And so these are some of the practices, and actually the opening to what's painful brings us both insight into these cycles of reactivity, which is more, it brings us wisdom. It brings us fundamental wisdom about the causes of our own suffering and how much that's connected with what I'm calling reactivity, grasping after the pleasant and pushing away the unpleasant. And we study that over and over again. And we also, in opening to what's painful, very naturally, compassion develops. And we deepen in compassion. And in some practices, as many of you know, we can also deliberately go into what's painful when we have balance of mind, and that will also develop compassion. We can do mindfulness practice before listening to the news about Israel-Gaza, Israel-Palestine, and take that as a form of practice and bring about compassion. You know, again, and the ability, the fact that we're no longer trying to get rid of the painful and grasp after the pleasant brings us an increasing equanimity. We have wisdom about the dynamics. We can see that. We develop compassion. If it's getting to be too much pain, we also bring in joy. We bring in qualities which balance it out, you know. So, for example, the beautiful teaching about how compassion needs to be balanced with joy and equanimity. You know, very important for people who are in the helping professions, right? And so there are these different teachings. There are also, as many of you know, I won't go into it so much, are teachings in which we are encouraged to study impermanence and death and to bring that into our meditation, find ways to work with that. And then I'll close by just saying that there are ways that we can bring all of these understandings into our personal relationships. You know, all the practices are the basis for compassion for others, empathy for others. And we can also bring it into being with social realities as activists or as just attending, like right now, to Israel-Palestine. And this is, I think, really the heart of what we find in different traditions, particularly I'm thinking of traditions of nonviolence. I would interpret the nonviolence of Gandhi and King as saying, we have received pain, we will not shoot the second arrow. That's exactly what the teachings of nonviolence are about. We will not pass on the pain, and we will respond very forcefully to the situation. I think that's what's deeply needed with all social issues and conflicts. And there's this parallel, again, between these traditions and Buddhist practice. I think very, very close, very, very close understandings. This is from Dr. King. The end is reconciliation. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opposers into friends. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of human beings. And I'll close with one story and one poem. The story I just heard 2 days ago. These is from friends, Israeli friends who are Buddhist teachers, who are also activists. And they are, even at this time, going almost every day into the West Bank, along with Israeli friends, and helping with the olive crop with their Palestinian friends, something they've been doing for 10 or 12 years. And their Palestinian friends give them the safety, reading, you know, about how safe it is. And this is from my friends. As well as supporting the Israeli community, we are going into the West Bank almost daily to support our beloved Palestinian friends in their olive harvest. We are joined by a few Israeli friends every day. It is not much, but it makes a difference. It is easier to hold all this tragedy together and to nourish in each other and in the world our strong commitment to a better world. And then I'll close with a poem, which I think expresses a version of what I've shared with you. And this comes from Rumi, so from the Islamic tradition. So I've managed to bring in aspects of a few traditions. This is, you may know this is from Rumi, called The Question. One dervish to another. What was your vision of God's presence? The other. I haven't seen anything, but for the sake of conversation, I'll tell you a story. God's presence is there in front of me, a fire on the left, a lovely stream on the right. One group walks towards the fire, into the fire, another towards the sweet flowing water. No one knows which are blessed and which not. Whoever walks into the fire appears suddenly in the sweet flowing stream. A head goes under on the water surface, that head pokes out of the fire. Most people guard against going into the fire and so end up in it. Most people guard against going into the fire and so end up in it. Those who love the water of pleasure and make it their devotion are cheated with this reversal. The trickery goes further. The voice of the fire tells the truth, saying, I am not fire, I am fountainhead. Come into me and don't mind the sparks. If you are a friend of God, fire is your water. You should wish to have 100,000 sets of moth wings, so you could burn them away, one set a night. So thank you very much. I hope you can see the parallels with Rumi and the Buddha. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Donald.
Well, you're welcome.
And thank you for the stories of your friends in Israel and the West Bank, and the struggle that's going on there is definitely a space for cultivating our open heart and empathy for the suffering that's going on there, to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, very much.
I had a question, and I'm not going to ask too many questions, so we'll open it up pretty quickly here. But around, when we look at mindfulness and compassion, those two together, and I'm sitting in looking at this as a practice. So we mentioned we have physical pain, emotional pain, difficult thoughts. What is the process of being with that? And I'll use a word, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, inquiring into it. And also, as we inquire into those difficulties, the role of compassion within that.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. And so some of you know that some of you know the teaching of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, coming from the text, right? Is that something? How many people know that particular teaching? And you probably know, if you've studied that the second foundation of mindfulness is looking into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So it's very connected with this teaching. And so one way of practicing is to really look into this, is to take this as a way of practicing that you could, if you have a half-hour meditation, you could do something like settling your mind, becoming more present for the first half. Second half, you could say, I will try to notice the pleasant and the unpleasant, especially when they are at a kind of a moderate level or so, or when they're there, but not on a scale of 1 to 10, not the 9s or 10s, when they're up to maybe up to a 7 or something. And I will actually be with them and just bring mindfulness. Okay, what does the pleasant feel like? bring mindfulness to the pleasant, bring mindfulness to the unpleasant. And we hang out with what's pleasant or what's unpleasant. In doing so, again, we study this whole area over and over again. It's a very simple practice. Or, we could also, maybe do something like that practice when we are, I don't know, going to the dentist. And we're getting, just say, let me be mindful of that, 9-inch needle coming towards my mouth when I'm having a little bit of anesthetic, right? I'm joking a little bit. Or I can notice the pleasant, with a meal, like I said. And so that done over and over again by itself, simply being with what's painful by itself leads to compassion. Because, we realize, I go into a difficult emotion and I realize, oh, other people are like to have this as well. Or, let's say I have something, maybe my back is a little bit out of whack and I go into that. And I go into the painful physical experience and maybe I notice some difficult emotions. I hang out with those by itself. That leads to compassion. And so compassion develops very naturally from just being with that process. And we can also, there are other practices that don't work with mindfulness, but that work, much like loving kindness, that work with deliberately. They also involve deliberately going into the painful some, but they're more, so they're, a typical practice might be towards a particular person, maybe who's experiencing some difficulty. We bring to mind what's difficult for that person, do that for a minute or two, and then we repeat phrases typically, may you be skillful with what's difficult for you. We say something which we think will be helpful, and we cultivate inner compassion there. But the first step is that we bring to mind what's difficult for the person. We could do that, with friends, with family when they're going through something difficult. Might be able to do it with the news sometimes, although it could be very, very intense. So, and then the inquiry part would come when we just we study it and we notice. We say, okay, I'm going to be with a moderate level of pain if it comes up in the next 15 minutes. May or may not come up, but let's say it comes up. Let's say I bring to mind something painful that happened yesterday, and I notice it. The inquiry can come, let me be mindful of the pain, and notice, the inquiry would be like, notice if it changes. Be with the what's painful, does it change? Does it follow that model for independent origination? Do I tend to go to some kind of pushing away, a thought? And it might be, I'm with a painful physical experience. I might say, why am I doing this? This is stupid. I should just, this isn't fun. That'd be a form of aversion and a form of reactivity, most likely. And so we could notice those tendencies. We can notice that at a physical level. We can notice that emotionally. If maybe anger comes up for someone, I can bring inquiry. Let me notice what the anger is like at the level of the body. Stay with it. Notice how it changes. Notice the emotions, how they change. Am I going into reactivity, and so forth?
Is that where insight and wisdom can begin to arise as we start to notice patterns in that way?
The insight and wisdom is really knowing those two teachings, the two arrows and the movement from contact to grasping or contact to aversion. It's knowing that in our own experience over and over again. That's insight and wisdom. So, it's, the teaching is very simple, but the insight comes from knowing it in one's own experience over and over again. So it's not particularly a complicated teaching. wisdom isn't necessarily about something complicated. It's just really knowing it so that, you know that well enough so that at some point you have a difficult experience and you've done this enough. So you watch, oh, I can see, okay, let's say I just had a really difficult experience with my partner and I'm, it's an hour later and I'm noticing myself just judging my partner harshly, right? And the wisdom and insight is there. Oh, I'm shooting the second arrow. I don't want to do that. Can I be with what's painful? Because the other thing that, to tie back to what I said earlier, bringing mindfulness and compassion to what's painful is how we transform it. Remember, I was saying that we don't get rid of reactivity, we transform it, like in that Richard Rohr quote. We transform reactivity, we don't simply suppress it. Suppressing it won't actually work. We can do that temporarily sometimes if I'm, needing to, let's say I'm driving somewhere and I start a lot of reactivity and I say, no, I need to pay attention to driving, let's suppress it. Well, that's skillful. But in the long run, we don't suppress, or if I'm a nurse and I'm with a patient and I'm getting reactivity about what my partner did last night, I want to suppress that. That's wise in the middle of action. But in the long run, I want to transform it. And that requires being with it. Yeah.
Well, I'll pause on my questions. I have some others, but are there other people who would like to unmute and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat as well? And Miriam.
Yeah, please. Looks like, is it Nikki?
Yeah, I just had a question. You said that you'd been going and you hadn't gotten, it was always blissful. And then one time you went and you had the experience of, I forget if it was sadness, but it was a negative.
Yeah.
Did you go into that session with a different mindset or to be more receptive to receiving that?
Yeah. I knew what the teachings were, and this was a few years. I think my predominant experiences, probably the first 2 years, were quite pleasant and opening up to insights and even like, a lot of the subtle body energies that are really very blissful. And so when I had, the fear was there and it didn't go away. Of course, probably initially I wanted it to go away. When it didn't go away, I think I had enough wisdom at that part to say, let me be mindful. And I think, at retreats, we're checking in with teachers, so they probably guided me. I don't remember the specifics of that, but for whatever reason, I was able to bring mindfulness to it and just hung out with the fear over and over again. And it was amazing. It's like I had never been with fear in such a protracted way. So it's really, this is, amazing. Got to study fear for many, many days, many hours a day, and got to see, I got to see how fear was so much based, for example, on projections into the future, right? Fear was not, one of my deep insights was fear is not about present experience. It's really about the future, right? And that I hadn't seen that so clearly. So there were all sorts of insights into the nature of fear that came about. But I kind of got it, I also kind of got it, okay, maybe I've had a little charmed life the first year or two of meditation, mostly blissful, positive experiences, but I was pretty clear that the other shoe was going to drop, right, so to speak. Yeah.
Reverend
Yeah,
G?
Oh, and I'll have to figure out how to remove. Okay, hi. Thank you so much for joining our community. All right, I'll put my video on, but I
Here
have
you
a
go.
headache. I haven't even showered today. So I'm the minister here at the church, and I'm so happy that you accepted our invitation. And I have I have a twofold question.
Okay, great.
So one of them is about the second arrow, and I wonder if this is a third arrow. You know, there's that one thing that we're in the midst of a conflict, and then we just bite back.
Yeah,
That being the second arrow. But I also imagine that if we are not, if we never make ourselves, well, I wouldn't say comfortable, but at least make ourselves sit with our own pain.
yeah,
I'm imagining it's very difficult to allow another to be in pain in our presence. So our tolerance, or our no, I don't want to use tolerance. I want to say, oh God, there's a word, but I can't think of it. Anyway, so I think it's then I think we tend to deny another one's pain and suffering as well, because if we reject it so much in ourselves, we can't witness it in another.
yeah,
And then we will do that even, I imagine that we do that even at times when we haven't been activated.
yeah,
Would that be a third arrow?
yeah, yeah. Good to meet you. And yeah, the second arrow is shorthand for the second through the 4,000th arrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
So it keeps
That-
on going. Yeah.
Then
And-
my second. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me answer the other part of what you asked, because it's really important, and it didn't come out in what I was sharing, which is that when we can't open to pain, typically our hearts are closed. And when I have pain and I can't open to my own pain, I'm definitely, like you said, not going to be able to open to the other's pain. And reactivity will have the quality basically of shutting the heart down. Reactivity doesn't permit the open heart. Typically, when I'm in reactivity, I'm in habitual, automatic tendency. Just think of an interpersonal conflict, and someone judges me, one person judges me, and I judge right back. Both of us, our hearts are closed. We can't really feel the pain of the other unless we stop or something changes. In the shooting of the second arrow, the heart's closed. So what we need to do, this is why if I can attend, often I might need to attend to my own pain first by myself. That opens my heart. And often, for example, we do a practice like I do compassion practice with myself, or something like forgiveness practice with myself. Those will tend to open me to my own pain. And almost immediately I'll have a sense the other person has pain also. And then I'll be able to, and that totally changes things. When I know there's pain for me and pain for the other, and my heart is open, it totally changes the whole situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my second question is, do you think it's possible to reach transcendence without a rigorous inner, what do you call this? What is it actually? Mindfulness, inner mindfulness practice.
And how would you define transcendence?
To me, transcendence is, what a good question. To me, transcendence is that I really don't shoot the second arrow. I don't resist the first one. That I'm in the eye of the storm.
Yeah. 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 And sometimes transcendence is also linked with a sense of mystical experience or touching some other reality, God or Buddha nature, whatever. But I think it's somewhat.
For me, it would be, and occasionally I get this sense of the absolute oneness.
Yeah.
Like I when I cannot tell the difference between me and air and tree and people, and that just overwhelming oneness, but it doesn't last for me.
Yeah. 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 That's a really crucial question. Because I think in Buddha's teaching, this would be called awakening. And it's talked about in different ways. One way it's talked about is as a kind of non-dual awareness, which I teach in my retreats. And in my experience, there are occasional people who can access that more readily without so much training, but very, very few and rare. And for almost everyone that I meet and myself, doing a very significant amount of training is important. It's actually, in my experience, it's actually not so hard to touch something like transcendence briefly.
Mhm.
And I teach different methods to sort of touch what I was calling non-dual awareness. It's not so hard to touch that for a brief period, to have it be stable and there in everyday life a lot of the time. That takes a lot of training and a lot of background, and including I have found very important, for example, is training in what we sometimes call concentration practice, the mind being able to be stable and going beyond the ordinary tendencies of the mind to meet all experience with concepts, because that transcendent experience is beyond conceptualization. Even though later, when we come down from it, we can conceptualize about it. But the actual experience is not conceptual. And for that to be stable, we have to have, through training, a very, very quiet mind. And that doesn't happen without training for almost everyone. But it can, but the training is beautiful and fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions. Yeah. Please,
Sherry.
Sherry. Yeah.
I get confused sometimes by how the word self is defined in Buddhism and then in psychology.
Yeah.
And I know in terms of the dualistic thinking,
Yeah.
Is there a better way for me, maybe another term or something for me to think of?
Thanks, Sherry. It's I think in all of the Buddhist teachings, it's the most conceptually confusing area of all. So I think you're right to ask the question. And I'll try to give a practical answer now. And there's this website that Eric mentioned called Dharma Seed, and I have given series of talks on the Buddhist teaching called anatta, usually translated as not self. And I have given teachings on that, like a talk series of 4 or 5 talks, where I went into 4 45-minute talks. So if you want more detail, you can get it. Okay. So that being said, what I have found most helpful are a few things. One is an understanding that there are developmental dimensions of this teaching. And so what the teaching is pointing to is that in the depths of practice, much like the discussion about transcendence, we go beyond the ordinary sense of self. And we can experience this in everyday life sometimes when we're deeply communing in the wilds or with another person, and so forth. And at the deeper levels of spiritual practice, we go beyond the ordinary sense of self. But the ordinary sense of self is actually very important at earlier levels of practice. You know, that the ordinary sense of self is where ethical responsibility comes from. You know, who decides it would be good for me to do 20 minutes a day of spiritual practice, and let me check that I'm doing it. That's the ordinary self, right? And so a sense of self is valuable for responsibility, accountability, being ethical, meeting responsibilities. So I think a developmental framework can be helpful, thinking that we don't just simply immediately try to transcend the self. And there are a lot of complications in terms of the Western psychological sense of self and this teaching about not self. And it's related, you know, it's related to what I just said. And, you know, some people who are therapists and Buddhist teachers say you have to have a well-developed, mature self before you go beyond it. You know, I tend to agree with that. You know, if you try to go beyond before you have a well-developed sense, it could be a kind of what is sometimes called spiritual bypassing, and not helpful. I've seen that in a lot of my students. They want to really get to the deeper places, but they, you know, I remember having a discussion with one person. He got really angry because I suggested that maybe his next major spiritual step would be to get a full-time job. And he didn't like that. Okay. And so, and often we have a lot of work to clean up our personal stuff, you know, things that are in ways that are identified more in Western psychology. When I teach on transforming the judgmental mind, I integrate all this together. Maybe last thing to say would be that when I actually do practical teachings on not self, I don't talk about it very much conceptually, but I talk about it more practically and say that, you know, we need to do our own work, cleaning up the self, working with our own conditioning, our own stuff, our own psychological material, our own residue from what we got as children growing up, and our, you know, what I use the language of talking about limiting beliefs. You know, I may have a limiting belief from childhood is that, you know, a simple example would be perfectionism, right? And that dictates, you know, I have to clean up my perfectionism before I go in, you know, before I'm going to stabilize a lot at the depths of spiritual practice and go beyond the self. So that is actively working with my own stuff, right? And informed by Western psychology to a large extent. So we do that. And then we gradually also learn periods in which we can have a sense of experiencing our own thoughts and emotions and body sensations without much sense of self. Our ordinary mindfulness practice does this. We sort of take an approach to, okay, let me just be with my emotions, like we were talking about earlier. Let me just be with them as they're occurring without having it all go through me and mine, almost like a naturalistic scientist. I'll just observe my emotions. I'll observe my thoughts. I'll be with my body sensations. That's actually going beyond our ordinary sense of self. So some of our practice, we learn how to go beyond the ordinary sense of self, like in ordinary mindfulness experience. And then thirdly, and related to the first, we see where in our experience, there's something like what I call a thick sense of self. So I talk about thinning the self, what I just talked about, and then seeing where the self is thick, you know, like where I have a strong self-image or there's a lot of reactivity or I have this area where I'm just totally self-preoccupied, and we study those. We bring investigation. So that's a quick summary of the 5 talks. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. Did that resonate? Yeah, great.
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah.
You need to unmute yourself.
I lost the screen there for a minute. I apologize. You're talking about the no self, and it seems like in my practice, learning and witnessing about all the interior history and all of that, and then at a certain point, it's like turning and looking out, no longer focusing on the self. And actually, there's both for me, a kind of this no self, but all selves, the identity of realizing that being connected with everything. And I don't know if that sounds familiar or.
Yeah, that can be there in different ways, in different kinds of experiences when we've worked with our own minds, so we're not conceptualizing so much. Simply in typically early on in meditation, if my mind gets quiet, and I have been some with my own experience, then I turn it to what we call a tree. I can be with the tree in an entirely different way, where there's not the usual separation between what I call myself and what I call the tree. In fact, I can be with the tree without conceptualization. So it's more forms and colors connected with other things. So I think it's very natural that the kind of experiences that you're describing, they tend to open up in our meditation practice, particularly when the mind gets quiet and we can be with our experience without conceptualizing, which sometimes just lasts for a little while. And we can get more of a sense of interdependence. What many of you probably know, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese teacher, talks about interbeing, right? And says, this is our basic nature. It's more of an emphasis in Mahayana Buddhism than in the early teachings, but it's a beautiful, nonetheless, it can be an experience that we have that of more like the unity or what I was talking about as transcendence. Also, it's a different kind of experience, of a kind of oneness, if we call it that. Although those are the labels we use after the experience. Yeah.
Donald, I had a quick question. I know we're getting close here to the end. In Buddhism, we sometimes talk about the view, having a clear view of reality. And there's that relative reality, which is more of the senses, and then that infinite reality, what a relative and absolute. And I'm curious if, which can get a little challenging, I think, for Westerners to, buy into the whole Buddhist perspective on what reality is, this non-dual reality. Is there anything in the science, from a Western science perspective, that is analogous to this idea of a kind of a non-material reality? And I'm thinking of, in physics, we talk about, particle and wave. Is there anything that helps Westerners kind of get into this view of seeing the outer world through the senses as less solid and more wave-like, more interconnected? I don't know if that's a very good question to ask, but I'm just curious if there's a way in for Westerners through our kind of science mind to think about this other way of knowing that's no self.
Yeah, or at least I think of three areas of science. I mean, for some people, the work on physics will let us know that the world is much more complex and less solid than we think. That we are more or less putting our concepts on, on a more gross level of reality, and that when we study it at a much more detailed level, it's mostly empty space, right? It's mostly empty space with a lot of things flying around, like electrons, right? And so that could be helpful for many people to give us a sense that the way that we ordinarily experience the world is a kind of construction. So that's one area. A second area is also just to see how some of the studies of perception can be helpful, including cross-cultural studies, to see that different cultures construct the world in different ways, right? And some of them are more solid, some of them are more fluid. And so studying perception and studying the kind of constructed nature of our experience can be helpful for seeing that. And I was thinking also of there's a way that our retinas actually work in a way that's different from other species. Let me see if I can remember the technical term, but basically our retinas keep the after image of something for a fraction of a second, which increases the experience of it being solid. Other species don't do that. Other species have less of a sense of solidity. And some of that can be explained in the very mechanisms of vision, because it's especially our vision that lets us see the solid world. And then a third area of research that occurs to me is some of the research on meditation, which shows that as people go into some of the deeper experiences, like the non-dual, it's correlated with certain changes in the brain, and particularly a very, very dramatic decrease of ordinary conceptualization. So when we stop conceptualizing so much, the experience of the world is different. So that can give, and of course we conceptualize in everyday life for very practical reasons, which are, can be helpful, are helpful, right? So it's not like conceptualization is necessarily a problem, not at all, but that it's, we learn to conceptualize the world at a young age, but we forget that we've constructed the world. Right? If you've been around young children, you know that you can know that they have to learn to bring words and concepts and see solidity, where initially they have what William James calls the buzzing, booming confusion, right? Things are just like that. And then we learn to, okay, make it solid and so forth. So even that research on how children develop concepts and a sense of ordinary reality would be supportive for what we're talking about. Those are 4 areas, really interesting. Yeah.
Any closing questions? Comments?
Spontaneous poems.
Well,
Thank you for sharing part of your day with us, Doc.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure. I think I've been in Kalamazoo once. I think, Eric, I was there once with you, wasn't I?
yes, yep.
At a Fetcher meeting. Yeah. I remember that.
And I think Miriam did drop in the dharmaseed.org link. And if you go to that website, you can search by teacher. And I think all you have to do is put in Donald, and it will probably come up.
Maybe also my website would be helpful, because I teach online quite a bit.
Yeah.
And for example, I'm teaching next Wednesday at Spirit Rock, and I'll probably have part 2 on, I gave talks on the foundations of skillful approaches to conflicts.
Hmm.
So I'll continue with that next Wednesday, and you could, and I have some other online teaching coming up, although I also teach in-person retreats.
And is that accessible through your website? If we go to your website, we can find that information?
It should be, if I've just come back from traveling, so if I've updated my website, it's good.
All right, great. Well, thanks again, and just really appreciate your time and your dedication to practice for all these years, and especially the integration of the inner work of self-awareness with the outer work of transformation and healing and activism is a real important connection. That ethical work with the inner work.
I think that's what is most needed in our time. We need people who have gone deeply in inner practice and who are deeply committed to respond to the crises of the world. That combination is very, very crucial. I think it's a vision for our times. Yeah.
Well, it's a theme for maybe a series that we can do here on Thoughtful Thursdays or other programs to really look at that inner-outer integration, and doing it skillfully is essential. So, well, thank you all, and Donald, again, thank you. And it's our commitment to continue these programs to bring you thoughtful, social, spiritual, engaging ideas and programs like this to our community. And to do that, we need your support. And again, every little bit helps us continue this work to leave the world a better place than we found it. So thanks for coming tonight. And if you're interested, there's the tinyurl.com donate to UUCC there. There's also our address. You can take your smartphone and take a picture of that if you're not quick at writing and grab that, or you can visit our website. If you do UUCC in Portage, you'll come to our website and there's opportunities to donate there as well. And we also wanted to let you know about an upcoming Thoughtful Thursday. And this will be on November 9th. It's coming up quickly. It will be with Tam Morgan, and she is the president of the Foundation for Inner Peace. You may know that through the Course in Miracles. And she'll be speaking about the Course, the impact on her life, and the practical lessons, and how that can be engaged in the world to make this a more compassionate, loving planet. So we invite you to come to that. And you go to our website. I don't know if it's up yet, but there's usually a link there that you can register at. And it will be announced there at UUCC in Portage. So thanks again, and all of you have a wonderful evening. And thanks you again, Donald, for giving your time. We appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Miriam.
Bye, everyone.